This is Photographing the West podcast, the podcast for people who love to explore the western highways and byways while photographing the landscape and wildlife. And now here's your host, Kirby Flanagan.
Hello and welcome to the Photographing the West podcast. I'm your host, Kirby Flanagan. This is episode number 38. We're talking today to author, wildlife photographer, lecturer, and teacher, Jeff Rich. Jeff's recently completed a book on eagles, and we're going to discuss his book. And also, he's recently made a trip to Ecuador for bird photography, that is. So we're going to discuss that as well. So welcome, Jeff, and glad to have you back on.
Yeah, thanks, Kirby. It's good to be back on talking with you, and I really appreciate your giving me this opportunity.
You bet. Happy to do it. So for people that didn't listen to the podcast when you're on the first time, just tell everybody a little about yourself as a photographer and your interests and that sort of thing.
Sure. Yeah, I started taking pictures when I was a young person. I had a photography class in high school and then pretty much just self-taught myself and got really interested in photography in high school and college years back in the 1980s, and majored in a wildlife biology degree back in 1983 from Humboldt State, and so the two kind of loves just merged right before that point for my wildlife photography. I've been photographing nature, primarily wildlife, ever since. Had my first photos published in the late 80s, back in the good old days when we were shooting slide film.
Some people probably still remember that.
Yeah, probably.
So you've done a lot of traveling. I know you've read your book, and I know you've been to Alaska and a lot of areas, and just got back from Ecuador a few weeks ago, and we're doing a lot of bird photography down there. How was the Ecuador trip?
Yeah, I would say it seems like everywhere I go, I come home saying, man, that was the greatest place I've been. But Ecuador, I could say the same thing. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoy the people down there, but the country of Ecuador itself and the biodiversity and the ecological prowess down there in this teeny little country is truly amazing. I spent my time down there photographing birds. I went down for a company that leads birding trips, and so I went down to photograph and write articles about their business down in Ecuador for the birders and the birding community, as well as bird photographers. So I had a really good time and got some great new photographs of some really colorful, really unique. The birds down there are quite special and gorgeous.
That's what I understand from what I've seen. I was in Ecuador to travel to the Galapagos, and I agree they are very eco-tourist aware, and they have a great eco-tourist policy, and have done a good job of preservation down there. And a lot of people speak English, so that's always helpful. And their currency is tied to the dollar, so that you can spend dollars there very easily as well. So very friendly place to go for photography for North Americans, I would say.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah, they did adopt the U.S. dollar as their standard country currency, which is kind of unique. They also, when they rewrote their country's laws, they included laws to protect wildlife. They're like the only country that actually wildlife has rights, and so it's really important to them, and they're really seeing the value of nature and wildlife. Thank goodness. They still have their issues. There's still a number of issues that they are working on, as every country does, because they have to make a buck.
Sure.
Other ways besides just ecotourism. So there's still some work to be done there. I think it's really easy to get around and travel. Like you said, a lot of people speak English, and they've done a lot of nice work on some of their roadways, and makes travel a lot easier as well, getting around.
Sure. Yeah, it's a country on the west coast of South America for those people who don't know or don't remember from high school geography. But so it's the coastline itself, as I understand it. I haven't been to the coast, but as I understand, it's fairly dry. But as you go inland, you get into tropical rainforest pretty quickly, I think, don't you?
Yes, the country is quite small. It's maybe, I think, like the size of Nevada or something. But you have the middle of the country, if you could kind of picture it as somewhat of a circle. Right through the middle from north to south is the Andes mountain range with some really tall peaks.
Right.
And when you land in the capital of Ecuador, in Quito, like I did, 10,000, 8,000, I think it's 8,000 feet elevation. I mean, you're way up. And then you can go up and over down the west side, like you said, down to the ocean. And as you go down, you do go through a number of different habitats. It's really eco-diverse. And as you get to the lowlands, real, hot, humid, dry, Ecuador, is named for being right on the equator. And Quito is basically right on the equator. And then you were lucky enough to go even farther west and get to the Galapagos Islands, which, being part of the country, gives them even more diversity, because the Galapagos Islands are just an amazing in their own right. If you go east, then you're going down the other side of the Andes on the eastern slope down in there. And again, as you go down, you're going through a number of different ecosystems down into the Amazon. So my time was spent mostly kind of northwest of Quito, and I went up and over the Andes, and then I started going down. I went down up over, I think I was around 11, 12,000 feet going up top, and then down, I think I went about as low as about 3,000 or 4,000 feet. And it definitely started warming up, being more humid down there. I mean, I was in a coat in April up top there. It's, pretty high elevation.
All right.
Really neat place for sure.
So did the company you did the work for, did they take care of your travel arrangements and everything, or was that something you had to do?
Yeah, it's called the Magic Birding Circuit, and they own a number of birding eco lodges in the various habitats.
Oh.
And so so I got down there, and then they pretty much had me join a group of birders, not photographers, which is, as a lot of photographers know, a little different.
Right.
And so I was with a group of birders, and we were traveling around for about 7 or 8 days, and we went to 3 of the different lodges they have, and I was photographing the lodges, the birders, and the birds themselves. And then I had a couple days on my own where I wanted to go to a couple spots where the cock of the rock, the Andean cock of the rock, has a lek. I wanted to get down there and photograph those birds. They're just an amazing bird. And some ant pittas. So I spent a couple days doing that on my own. And then I had actually a little bad news, because my 500 millimeter lens fell over and broke. And so basically my bird photography ended on about day 5.
Oh, wow.
And I actually ended my trip a little early because of that. But I stayed about 9 days, and I continued to photograph with shorter lenses, like some hummingbirds and some scenery and some of the birders and the facilities there. So I made it work, and I can't wait to go back.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, the birds down there are just amazing from the pictures I've seen. Yours and many others, especially the hummingbirds, they're beautiful. I guess is all I can say. So sounds like a great trip.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And there's like over 130 species of hummingbirds in Ecuador alone.
Wow.
Which is, give you any idea for just some magnificent variations in color and size and tail length and bill length. They're really, 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 that was a fun part for me, was getting to photograph the different hummingbirds.
Yeah,
you can see I've been posting those on my Facebook page.
So did you get a chance to photograph anything besides birds, or was it strictly birds?
Yeah, it was a bird trip. I did, like I said, some of the birders and the facilities. It was a working trip, so I had a few other responsibilities like that.
Sure.
And then anytime there's scenery around, but it was basically when I had a spare chance, it was photographing birds. I got a couple nice new butterflies, but primarily birds when it comes to the wildlife.
Yeah. Well, good. Something I'd love to do sometime if it worked out. So you've got a new book on eagles. This is, if I remember right, this is your third book. Is that correct?
Right. Yep. And Bald Eagles in the Wild, and it just came out in May, so it's just out a couple of weeks, and I'm really excited about it. It's a personal project that I personally started and fell in love with bald eagles back in the late 80s. And the book is kind of it starts off with kind of that love affair I have that goes way back, and kind of my history of where and when and how I photograph eagles, and gets into our country's love affair with bald eagles and becoming the national symbol, and then the life history of eagles, which is quite fascinating, and the story of their decline in onto the endangered species list, and then their exit from the endangered species list, which was just a great success story in 2007 when their numbers had come back to the point where we could remove them from the endangered species list. So it's kind of this combination of a lot of good news stories with those kind of main themes, and then I end with some of the great science and citizen science that goes on today, still to this day, as well as during the comeback of the 1970s and 80s into the 1990s for the bald eagle. And a lot of other animals benefited from some of that work and some of the laws that we implemented in our country. So that's kind of what the main gist, I would say. And then, of course, sprinkled with, I don't know, I can't remember, 180 photos maybe that I've taken since, the late 1980s. I think my very first good eagle picture I took, I have my first 2 eagle photo pictures I took that were worth publishing. I included those in the book, kind of the beginning of it all for me. And I think, if I remember right, it was like around 1985, on Kodachrome slide film.
Yeah, I remember Kodachrome. It wasn't easy.
No.
So before I forget, where can people buy the book?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thanks, Kirby. It's sold on Amazon and in Barnes and Nobles and, bookstores like that. You can always get it. My website is where I would hope people would go to. I get a couple extra dollars that way when I sell them. And my website is just jeffrichphoto.com. So that'd be www.jeffrich. That's my name, Jeff Rich, and then photo, photo.com. And when you get to my website, you just click on one of the links up top for books, and the Eagle one comes right up.
Great.
So that
nice
would
and
be,
easy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll put that in the show notes so people don't have to try to write it down or remember it, so they can.
Oh, good. Yeah.
They can get the book. And I suppose we ought to mention how much it costs, huh?
The book's $24.95 and $5 for shipping. I'll ship it out the next day that I get the order. So it'd be about, what's that, $29.95, I guess.
Okay.
Would be the grand total with shipping.
Yeah.
Now, if you live near me in Northern California, we can do it without shipping. Or if you come visit at one of my talks at one of the birding festivals or something that I'll be traveling around to. I don't have that locked in place yet. The only one I have right now locked into place would be in October, which is kind of my original release party here where I live. We're going to hold off until October and do a really nice release party in town and involve a lot of the local eagle and the local eagle people and a lot of neat things here in the Redding, California area. But before that, online and doing, selling, books and talking to people like you, I'm starting that right now. So
Sure.
you're the second interview for me, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem at all. Great buy. If you're interested in eagles, I'd certainly recommend it. So you mentioned starting photographing eagles back in the 80s, and I know you talked in your book about making a trip up to the Aleutians, and why don't you tell everybody about that? That's certainly a challenge.
Yeah, Alaska is just a wildlife, paradise, wildlife photographer's paradise, and there's a lot of great places to go. And when I was trying to find nesting pictures of eagles for my book, it's not an easy thing to do. And up in the Aleutian Islands, they don't have trees out on some of those islands, and on Alaska is where I went a couple times. And so the eagles will nest on the ground and on top of cliffs and things. And so I wanted to find an area where I could get a view looking down into the nest. And so traveling out there is a challenge in itself. You get to Anchorage, and then you hope that the weather holds and the jet can land. So I've been there twice, and both times, things didn't go as planned. I think my first trip I had about 5 days scheduled on the island where I was going to be living in my blind and photographing eagles and mostly nesting eagles. I worked with a biologist up there, and we found some good opportunities. But I spent about a day and a half in the airport because the flight couldn't land. It's real, it can be nasty out there. And this was June. So even in the summer, the weather's not the best. And the airport is got a really short runway, and it's one side's on the water and the other side's got a mountain. So, I mean, things have to be just perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. But once you're on the ground, it's a beautiful little community. Really nice people. Basically a fishing village, commercial fishing. If you're familiar with like the TV show about the crab fishermen, Deadliest Catch, they do a lot of filming from that area. So it's really a fishing port and it's a native land. So I had to get a permit from the native corporation who owns the land there to set my tent up. And I would go out and just drive to the end of the road and set my tent up and then go photograph eagles. The darkness of night was about 5 hours long. I think the first time I set my blind up it was about 2 a.m. because I wanted it to be as dark as it would get, so I wouldn't disturb the birds. And then, the days are so long up there, it's kind of fun. A lot of rain, a lot of water, a lot of mist, so it was tough photography, but I got some things I was happy with. My second trip, the airplane, everything left Anchorage on time, and I'm going, sweet, this is going to be a piece of cake. And we're coming down into the airport, and as we're descending, and I'm looking out my window, and I can see the mountain on my left, and I couldn't see out the other side, but I knew there was water over there, and I go, oh, sweet, we're almost down, and things are going to go, and all of a sudden, the jet just went straight up. The pilot just pulled up this instant hard, going up and curving around to the right to miss the mountains, and it's like, whoa, what's going on here? And he came on the radio and said, we've decided it's just unsafe to land, so we're going to circle back to King Salmon. So we flew back to another island farther east and I don't think we spent the night, but we spent a number of hours until the wind died down and the conditions and the weather improved. So it's a great place for eagles, though.
Yeah, flying in Alaska is always a bit of a challenge, and a lot more so than flying in the lower 48, as you described. So,
in this area, I was just going to say, and out there it's a jet, which is, kind of nice, but some of those smaller planes are even, more interesting, but they actually will go out there in a jet. So that makes it a little bit better. They have a little more instrumentation and things, but still they've got to be really careful landing out on Alaska.
Yeah, for sure. So you had some interesting experiences in the blind, from what you said in your book. Why don't you talk a little bit about how you set up the blind and how you shoot from one, and which particular one you use, and any recommendations you've got in general for that?
Yeah, I think in general blinds are really valuable for wildlife photography, and I sit in them as often as I can. I think my favorite one is probably my floating blind. I love photographing water birds and water animals from a real low perspective. For the eagles, I was using what I call my terrestrial blind, which is pretty much just homemade. All my blinds are homemade, but this one is about 5 feet tall. I'm kind of a little person, but it works for me. I'm 5'7", slight build, so it works for me. But my blind is about 5 feet tall, and the top of it is probably 1.5 by 1.5
square,
square, and then it makes a pyramid towards the bottom, and the bottom is maybe 5 feet wide on all four sides. So it's a small little area, and I spent on the one nest up there. I left my blind set up for 2 days and slept in it because I didn't want to bother the birds. And once they got used to me and used to my blind, they woke up the next morning and there was my blind, and it seemed like they just didn't even pay attention to it. So that made me feel really good. And I decided just to stay in there and live in there. Blinds are great because, really their primary function for me is to break up the human silhouette, but also to stop any motion and movement that you make. And by hiding, birds and a lot of animals really key into movement and motion as a fight or flight kind of response. So staying in a blind a long time, I have to squirm and wiggle quite a bit. So that is really one of its primary functions, just to not show any movement. I really like hiding in a blind, and when it's kind of a sensitive area or sensitive species or sensitive situation, it's extremely important, and it alleviates a lot of stress too on the animals. So for the eagles, I was using that terrestrial blind. My favorite third blind I have is what I call my portable blind, and that's just my truck, my vehicle, where I'll shoot right out the window as I drive around and find various things. And so that, in areas where the birds or the wildlife is used to people or used to cars, like a wildlife refuge, like up where you are, up in Teton and Yellowstone, if you can get, off the road and not a lot of people around. I've done some shooting in those places just right out my car window off the side of the road. Or wildlife refuges, places that have roads that the animals become accustomed. And then once you get out, sometimes they get a little bit more spooked. But as long as you stay in, it seems like they are more comfortable that way. So we could talk about blinds. We could do a whole show on blinds, but I do like using them a lot.
Oh, okay, good. So this was the terrestrial blind. Is that like a tent that you converted it into a blind, or you made it from scratch, or what?
Well, so it's, I kind of gave you the dimensions, and so the top's a 2 by 2, 1.5 by 1.5 square piece of plywood. And then I attached some PVC. You can see it in my second book, The Complete Guide to Bird Photography, where I show pictures of how I built it. And it's got PVC pieces attached to the wood. And then I put a 5-foot long, 6-foot long PVC pipe, and it goes from the wood top down to the ground. So it's got 4 PVC pipes as a stand. And then I throw the cloth material over it with my porthole, and then I can anchor it down depending on where I am and how the conditions are, how long I'm going to be there. I can anchor it down with some rocks around it. The material's a little bit longer, so I can put rocks around it, or I can stake it down if I need to for long-term uses.
Okay. So most of the book's about bald eagles, but you also include some eagles from other countries too. So tell everybody about photographing them, where you found them, and how you photographed them.
Okay. So yeah, there's a number of species of eagles around the world. North America has two, and the golden eagle, as well as our country symbol, the bald eagle. And if you go to Africa and Asia, there's different species of eagles. Over there, there's golden eagles, but the bald eagle only occurs in North America, so it's pretty unique for us, and another reason our forefathers decided it would be a good symbol for our country. I went to Japan to photograph the Steller Sea Eagle and white-tailed eagles in the winter. And I wanted to just kind of have a little mention in the book that there are, more than just a bald eagle in the world and even in our continent. So when I was in Japan, I was on the northern island of Hokkaido, which in the winter is a cold place, and it's far north, probably. I'd have to recheck the map, but I'd say it's definitely equivalent to Canada, maybe even Alaska, southern Alaska maybe. And so it was covered in snow the whole time I was there, very cold place. And the Steller Sea Eagles will come in on the pack ice. So I actually got to get out on a boat in the pack ice, and we spent a couple different boat trips photographing the Steller Sea Eagle in Hokkaido. And the whitetail eagle was a little far, same island, but a little farther south. And there's also the Japanese red-crowned crane that are so famous and beautiful. Japan's a great place to photograph wildlife in the winter. Those are a couple of the key species people will go over to photograph. And the white-tailed eagles are, I saw those in and around the cranes. There was one area, it was a crane reserve for the red-crowned crane, which is, a very important symbol for their country. And so they had some nice things set up for them, and they had some good habitat and some feeding stations set up to attract the cranes and to keep the cranes healthy through the winter, to kind of supplement their food and their feed. And that's where the white-tailed eagles were also coming in, and that gave me some opportunities to photograph those guys. So yeah, Hokkaido was really a lot of fun. You have to take a lot of gear, in the winter when you're traveling, because you got to stay warm. So your suitcase gets quite heavy. I probably had 150 pounds of gear on that trip, and it makes traveling around from airport to the train station kind of tough. But you got to stay warm because you want to be outside all day long photographing.
Right. So did you do this trip on your own, or did you go with a tour, or how did that work?
Yeah, that trip was one of my photo tours. I was co-leading with my friend Jeremy Woodhouse, and we were leading a group of photographers. We started out with the snow monkeys, spent some days with them, and then I went up to Hokkaido for a week doing that, and spent some time with the cranes as well, and then the swans that are so famous up there on the lake. So that was a tour that we co-led together, yes.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, I've read about all those birds and seen pictures of them. There's some beautiful birds, and sounds like an amazing trip. Is that something you offer on a regular basis, or was it a one-time thing, or the tour, I mean?
Yeah, so a couple times I did it, and I have not done it for a few years now, but it's kind of like high on my to-do list. So I see myself doing it again down the road, but I don't have anything planned in the near future to Japan. But it's definitely in the back of my head that I, want to shoot it. And it was long enough ago, actually, that I was still shooting slide films. So I'd like to go back and shoot the digital.
Yeah.
So I think my most recent trip was probably 8 years ago, maybe 10, something like that. So yeah, it's high on my list, but I don't have anything scheduled now.
All right. Okay. So you've been photographing the eagles for a long time. Did you learn anything new about the eagles in putting this book together?
Well, I've learned a lot over the course of photographing eagles for 30 years plus. I've done a lot of research and worked with a lot of biologists, and I've learned a ton. Some of the most recent things I've learned is some of the newest research that's being done in the last couple of years is with some GPS tracking and cell phone tower, getting data through the cell phone tower data as the eagles move, and they're learning a lot of interesting things about their migratory patterns. And we've always known, that they move around, but we've never really known where and how far. And so there's some new data. There's a real interesting study down at Alabama, Louisiana area. One of the professors down there put some trackers on some of his young eagles, and after they fledged the nest, they were in Canada and Alaska, and in just a matter of a month or so, and then back home within less than a year. They did that incredible round trip. And we're finding that eagles are migrating long distances that we never really realized it was that far. I mean, we had guesses, but now they know for sure. Same thing out of Oklahoma, some studies there. They're doing some cool tracking with the Sutton Center and finding similar travels. The eagles are going up, into Canada and Alaska and right back to where they nested, in very, very close to where they were born. And it just kind of, a couple things. One is it just reminds us how important and valuable it is to work with other countries, with our environment and our environmental laws and our wildlife, because, they're not just American wildlife. We have so many animals that, go to Mexico and beyond, and Canada and beyond. So that international work with the environment is extremely important. Another cool new thing that I learned was last year, I think it was last year or the year before, there was a bald eagle nest that all of a sudden, up in Canada, British Columbia, all of a sudden two young red-tailed hawks were in the nest with the young eagles. And they're like, they had a lot of people in the area watching the nest, and so they said, wait a minute, where'd those two come from? And within a day or two, one of the young red-tailed hawks passed away. The other one made it. And so there was all kinds of interesting conjecture of how they got there. And just the fact that the eagles raised this red-tailed hawk chick with its own chicks is kind of a fun story. I think one of the most interesting ones that I just learned about, like I pretty much finished the book in December, finished writing it. We, got it off to the editors and the printers in the last 5-6 months. In November, I went up to Canada and I visited the largest concentration of eagles in the world up around in British Columbia around the Harrison River, and they have 4,000 to 5,000 eagles congregating there in November and December, and even into January, feeding on the salmon. And while I was there, I met just a world famous bald eagle expert biologist, David Hancock, and I've included some of his stories in my book. And he was telling me about a heron rookery that had a bald eagle nesting within the rookery. And the eagles, everybody was all worried that the eagles were going in and taking fledgling herons and, kind of taking advantage of the herring rookery. And the eagles were pretty smart for putting their nest there. And it all changed when the eagle nest wasn't used the next season, and the eagles built a new nest a couple miles away. And in a matter of months, the heron rookery moved to be around the bald eagle nest.
Wow.
And so, the conjecture there, and so more study being done, and they realized that the herons were benefiting just as much from having the eagles there protecting them, more so than the eagles eating their fledglings once in a while. And the eagles were keeping away other predators because they were guarding their nest. And so the herons were actually benefiting and actually moved their rookery to be with the eagles. And
Wow.
so I had never heard anything like that story. So that was kind of a new one. I just learned that I was just shaking my head like, that's cool.
Yeah, indeed. I don't think I've ever heard of that before either, or not with those two species anyway. So, yeah, I've read about that
The
area in BC, and yeah, that's on my bucket list somewhere for sure because they have an amazing population of migratory bald eagles there, and it's closer than going to Alaska, so sounds good to me.
Yeah, I actually drove there, so that was cool.
Ah, okay.
Drive there in less than a day, whereas Alaska takes like a week. So it's a lot
Yeah,
closer.
if you're lucky, if you're not pulling the
Yeah.
trailer.
Yeah.
So this was your third book, and talk about how the process of getting published has changed over the years. I know it's, or at least from what I've read, it's getting harder every year to get published. So how's that worked out for you?
Yeah, it's interesting how photography's changed and marketing of photography and print media. Because I did a lot of work with magazines and books over the years, selling my photos as stock. So, yeah, magazines are kind of getting thinner and going out, and books are getting harder and harder to print because people are not buying them like they used to. One company that I work with that put my publisher that published the book is Amherst Media, and they seem to still be quite interested in publishing some cool wildlife slash photography, kind of their main. They do all kinds of books actually, but those are the two main ones that I focus with because those are my areas. And they're still making books, and thank goodness I'm part of their team, and I'm looking forward to working with another one here someday soon, but I haven't got anything that I can announce yet. But yeah, so the change, I guess, has been more like pretty much the actual process of making a book. I would say the change has gone from sending slides through the mail and then sending slides through FedEx to then, sending pictures digitally through various email and then through various, ways you do it today. I use Dropbox. I uploaded a bunch of stuff to Dropbox, and then the editor just pulled them out of there, and things that store in the cloud. And then as far as the writing goes, it's morphed from, when I started, I was using a typewriter. The computer has been, I think my first book, I think I just stuck in the U.S. mail. It was all, typed and printed on my computer. And then my second book, hard copy, and then this one was just they had some special program that was in the cloud, and I just kind of typed right into the program, and their book came out. It's kind of changed a lot. And then in that program they had, I would put in the book and then included photos that would help tell the stories in my book. And then in this program, as I typed it, it was set up as a book, page 1, page 2, and I typed the words in it. And then I'd include the file name of the photo. And then my editor took that file information and matched it up with the Dropbox actual photo, and then she did what she did. The magic, they do editing it and then send it off to the printers. I don't know if that's too much information or not enough information, but yeah, the change is there, and certainly selling photos to books and magazines count to be, and there's a lot less of them around.
Yeah, for sure. Well, before we go, let's tell everybody again where to find you and your photos and your books.
Yeah, so my book, jeffrichphoto.com, and my Facebook page, you can find me in Cottonwood, California, Jeffrey Rich. I think my photo that goes with that is the cover of my bird photography book. I'll probably change it to my Eagle book photo soon. Probably the two best places.
Okay, good. Well, thanks for getting together with me again, Jeff. It's been great fun talking to you. These podcasts are published on the 15th and 30th of each month. They're available on iTunes as Photographing the West and on my website, www.flanaganphotos.com, as well as most RSS feeds. So bye for now, and we'll talk again in a couple of weeks.
Thanks for listening to Photographing the West podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast in iTunes and leave us a review. Till next time, here's wishing you safe travels and good light.